Welcome back. I hope you all had a fun short break, but it's time to get into the fun of learning. God, actually, I didn't make that sound fun at all, but I'm sure Adam Milward will. He's joining me. He's a director over at Metadata Works, and he's here with an interesting discussion about measuring data fairness and their experiences working in the public sector. Adam, I'm sure you've got plenty to cram into here. I won't take any more time away from you. Please tell us what you're here to talk about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Darren. So I'm Adam Milward, CEO and co-founder of Metadata Works. My background's kind of data engineering. I don't know if there are any data engineers on the call, and feel free to pipe up. But I think the problem with us data engineers is we're very good with data when it comes to communicating with machines. That's our business, and we love doing that. You come to us. But I would say the trouble with some of us data engineers is that communicating with humans and people isn't necessarily always our forte. Someone used to always tell us the joke that, what's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert data engineer? And an extrovert data engineer looks at, your feet when he's talking to you. And I think that kind of sums us up. I think, on the projects that I've been on, particularly, it's not been the technical elements that have been ultimately the biggest blockers and the biggest issues. It tends to be the problems with people. So about communicating with people on large, complex systems integration projects. But before I kind of go into the talk and talk about measuring data value and measuring data fairness, findability, accessibility, reusability, all of that good stuff, I think it's good to start with a story, a personal story about the impact of data. And this one's really about me and my family. I started the business with my father 3 years ago. But if we go back in time to the early 90s when I was a young child, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she had a lump that was growing incredibly quickly. And she went for treatment in the Royal Marsden Hospital in London. And she was given ultimately an experimental chemo, MMM, and very quickly it shrunk the lump. And within kind of 3-4 months, she was completely better. The lump had gone. So it's fantastic treatment. Now, fast forward kind of 5-6 years later, the whole family had been moved to Devon. And unfortunately, she found that she had a lump again. And it was growing incredibly quickly again. And so, David and my mother went to the local hospital in Devon, which was Derriford Hospital, and they gave her a treatment called CMF initially. And it made absolutely no difference. And after a few months, in fact, it carried on growing. And after a few months, David and my mother had a conversation. They talked to their oncologist and they said, look, this has happened before and we had this fantastic treatment. Can we have it again? Now, oncologists ultimately, need to take the facts. They need to have the data. And after, a bit of discussion, he said, look, I'm happy to give this to you. It's not what the latest research and latest pathways say, but I need to have the data. I need to have the evidence. And at the time, there was no way to get that medical record across. And in fact, they couldn't get hold of the consultant in the Royal Marsden. And Dave and my father ended up driving all the way to London. He managed to pick up a paper record, so the data, physically brought the data back to the oncologist. And after that, he gave her the courses of Triple M, and literally within weeks, the tumor vanished this time. So I think it's a really good example of the impact of data and the way that can actually save lives. So I think that's an introduction into what we do. In terms of looking at data fairness and the problem of data fairness, let me just try and get to my next slide. So I'd also like to tell you another story. Again, this has come from my mother again. She's told me about this fantastic bird in North America, and Clark's nutcracker, and it collects almost 100,000 seeds over the summer. And on its own, that's fantastic. You'll see how this relates in a second. Over 500 seeds per hour, which is amazing. And it creates these little caches of 1 to 15 seeds. And you have 10,000 caches over this huge 10-mile radius. But the amazing thing about Clark's nutcracker is after 6 months, it can locate all of these seeds under three foot of snow. It's got a fantastic memory, and they're researching its brain around nootropics and medications to help our memory. And we thought this was a really good example in the wild of something that has fantastic memory. The problem with us humans is we're not necessarily as good at remembering where we've put things. And I think in terms of data, we're great at collecting data. Storage is really cheap. We collect and collect and collect, and there's been this huge big data revolution. What we're not necessarily so good at is finding that data, making use of that data, turning it into something impactful. So in terms of what we do in organizations, we want to be the kind of Clark's nutcracker of the organization, the organizational memory that allows people to go out and find data more efficiently. The other thing that we like to talk about when we enter new organizations is that, we're all now in professional organizations almost data users. 10% of all jobs, not just kind of professional jobs, white collar jobs, require hard data skills. So you expect your staff to be able to read a spreadsheet, to understand the data, to start forecasting. And the trouble is that those domain experts who really know the business and can make great use of the data, whether that's a doctor, whether that's a financial analyst, is that they're not necessarily data engineers. So they're not really good at going out and finding that data and extracting the data. And I think that's where there's a really big gap in a lot of organizations. We've got this huge, set of staff and statisticians and domain experts who would like the data. And you've only got this small team of data engineers who can actually provide them with the environments where they can access that. So that's a really big issue, I think, in lots of organizations. It's something we hope to help people with. In terms of big data opportunities, probably I don't need to tell everyone on this call, there are a lot out there. There's 7 billion a year of savings in UK government, 100 billion a year of savings across European government, 300 billion in US healthcare, 600 billion in US consumer. We're constantly bombarded with the fact that there are these huge opportunities when it comes to big data. But unfortunately, realizing value from our data, getting the impact from your data is hard. And you don't have to kind of take my word for it. The research is out there. Most data users spend 10 to 20% of their time just searching for data. And then once they've got the data, they'll spend another 40 to 60% cleaning it, getting it ready and getting it into a state that they can actually really use it, which means there's not much time left to actually utilize their data science skills, to utilize the domain expertise when it comes to analysis. And I think in some cases, it can be even more. We were talking to a CTO of a police department a few weeks ago, an ex-CTO, and he said his analysts spend literally 4 days a week just trying to source data and 1 day a week solving crimes. So I think this stat, resonates with anyone who works across data. So really, I think data fairness and what we try to do with metadata is try and make ultimately using data simpler, faster, and safer. And I'd like to talk today about a case study where we looked at accelerating data readiness by over 30 times, reduced the amount of time it took to search for data, and provided data transparency in the UK. And hopefully some of those lessons will resonate with the audience here. So let's talk about the case study, Health Data Research UK. So they were created by the UK government a few years ago to become the National Health Data Institute for the UK. And the government said, in the UK, we've got fantastic universities, we've got lots and lots of skills around healthcare data research, we've got great life sciences companies, and we've got a really rich data set in the NHS that could be used to, accelerate research for all sorts of different treatments. But why aren't we doing more? And they asked Health Data Research UK to go out and investigate this and find out, what's the biggest barrier stopping data users using health data. So they went out and surveyed researchers, big pharma, NHS, university professors, and they asked them exactly this question: what's the biggest barrier stopping you? And I think for anyone working in the data world, probably the two answers are things you would expect. So the first one, 70% of respondents said finding and then accessing data was incredibly difficult. So some examples of that: if you're a rare disease researcher in the UK and you want to find a cohort of patients for your trial or your particular research, before Health Data Research UK, you'd have to go out to literally thousands of organizations and institutions to try and find that cohort of patients and ask them, is your data, do you have a cohort of patients that fit my criteria? And really that's almost impossible for research to do within a funding packet. It's incredibly hard. And then the second thing there is around accessing data. So even once you found the data itself, we had stories of postdoc researchers who'd got a funding package. They'd asked for the data, and while they were waiting for the access request to come through, they'd done the research, they'd published the paper, and then 2 to 3 months later, they suddenly got told, oh, you can access our data now. So there wasn't any transparency about the access process, when they would be able to get access to it, if they would be able to access it at all. So it's a big problem, not really good enough. And then the other problem is, once they've finally been told, okay, you can get access to this sensitive data, your research question fits our governance criteria, the data tended to just be chucked over the fence. It didn't look anything like the kind of glossy brochure that you would expect when you came to see the data. So, and essentially it wasn't research ready. And this is a big problem for researchers. And I don't think it's just in the healthcare world. I think anyone who's worked with data knows the problem, that you finally get access to the data and often it's unintelligible. There's a lot of backwards and forwards trying to find out what this particular column means, what's the context, what's the unit of measure, all of that kind of fun stuff. And HDR UK approached us and said, can you ultimately help? Can you help us with some of these challenges in the UK? So before we started, we said we're going to have to try and understand what data's out there. And to do that, we need to agree a standard. So how do we standardize the way someone can find data and describe data? And there are 2 ways of doing this. You've got nurture, where you go out and you sit in a room with a lot of experts, you look at the international standards that are out there, you build a conceptual framework, you build out the governance with an assurance board, a reference group, you start to do outreach to the community. And this is, I think, a really good method and gives you a good kind of academic basis. But I've been on too many projects where we've gone and created an incredibly elegant model on our own and not actually gone and consulted the wider group in an organization. We found out actually the standard doesn't look anything like what's going on the ground. And even though it's perfect and it's very elegant, it's not going to work because people have already done things differently. Out in the wild, the nature, it's done differently. So at the same time as going out and trying to find a standard, when we're trying to define a standard way of describing your data, making it more discoverable, making it more accessible, making it more research ready, we also went out and tried to look into the, in the wild, look at nature, and looked at a bottom-up approach where we went out and discovered how people were documenting their data. We assessed how that linked to some of the models we were developing from the top-down approach. We tried to publish everything we did out in the open so that we could collect feedback. We tested it and we iterated. And I think this is the approach we always take to every project when we're trying to bring together lots and lots of different stakeholders and asking them to do something in a common way. You take your top-down approach, you marry it with your bottom-up approach, and then you start to iterate. So that was step 1. I think there are some principles that we used when we started looking at making data discoverable, creating a common format. So one of the principles is, it had to be good enough and not perfect. We would start with the first version and then we would iterate. It would be better to get something out there and get feedback, and then we can crowdsource, the designs from the whole community and improve it. We wanted to base anything we did on user need. We wanted to use standards wherever possible. Whenever we were looking at collecting information, we looked at impact versus effort. We tried to make sure that all of the stakeholders in the community were engaged. And obviously every update needed to be version controlled. So anyone working in the software industry realizes that's incredibly important. If we're putting a standard out there, people need to know what the changes are, when they're changing, and have a place to map those different versions of the iterations that we're putting out there. The design approach. So we always have the same design approach on these projects before we start. If we're trying to make data more discoverable, we'll go out and we'll research, we'll find out what the data is, what the existing schemas are. We'll go out and engage a focus group across the stakeholders. We'll try and debate what that standard looks like, and then we can look at trying to publish that information and iterate. So again, I think this is a really good approach that you can apply to every project. And I think the other one is that you need to move fast, because you know, if these projects get stuck in that design stage, it's very, very, you know, it's often difficult. By the time you've, you know, created your perfect scheme and you've got to the end, you know, the business have changed, the challenges have changed, the stakeholders have changed. So we tried to move really, really fast with this. You know, within the first 4 weeks, we'd agreed a schema, we'd got it configured, we'd put it into the tool, and we'd started to, you know, make data more discoverable. You know, by week 10, we actually had people using the tool. We said, you know, look, this is an alpha, there's going to be iterations, but we had people on board. So I think that's something that I would really encourage people to do: move fast, maintain momentum, iterate, and improve. So in terms of what we ask people to collect, I think it's fairly similar, whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in wider research. So we do some work with the IPCC, for instance. This is a schema design that we've done with them, and you can apply it to, you know, any data discoverability challenge. But we have some summary information about a data set if you're trying to make it discoverable, where you capture, you know, the minimum requirements that you'd expect someone to have. So things like the title of a data set, an abstract, a content point, keywords, a digital object identifier, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important later, and the publisher of the data. So this is something, if you're looking back to those problems we discussed earlier, you know, making data more findable, these are some of the key things you'd expect to find if you were searching any kind of data catalog for a data set. The next one's a resource creator. So this is where you want to give people credit to all of those authors to make sure that they understand the key figures, and, you know, they understand, you know, if they publish this data set, they're going to get credit for it. Next one is the key fields, so coverage. So this is something that everyone likes to filter on when it comes to data. So spatial coverage, start date, end date, and all of that good stuff. The next one is tools. So we really like to link into GitHub. If you've got any tools that are associated with a data set, you should include that as part of a data catalog record. Is part of, so do you want collections of data sets, or the ways you can group the data set to add more value? Have you linked a load of data sets? This is your ability to communicate that. Once you've done all of this, you've managed to get everyone together and you've agreed a schema, you can create a catalog. And this is an example of a catalog we've created for the ONS, and it allows users to come in, it allows them to search for data, it allows them to understand any non-sensitive content, and then it allows you to safely request access to data. So if you think about all of those problems HDR UK we're talking about, finding data, accessing data, this gives you a search portal. And this is something we're really, really proud of doing with Health Data Research UK. Before we worked with them, there wasn't anywhere in the UK you could go and start searching for data. You literally had to go out to thousands of organizations. And now there's a central portal. You can go and you can start to find out what organizations are publishing data, where you can do your research and what that data looks like. So we'd agreed a schema. We'd created the catalog. It all looked great with the demo data, but what's next? How do you actually fill a catalog? An empty catalog is going to be worth nothing, even if it's the best software in the world. So we had to go out and work with initially 40 of the top research organizations in the UK, and essentially ask them what data do you have? Now, this has been, just to put it in context, this has been done before. I mean, there's some big UK healthcare data sharing interoperability projects, care.data you had before that, the National Programme for IT. So it's a difficult area. A lot of NHS providers are very, very busy. They're underfunded, under-resourced. And this was something they had to do on top of their day job. But what we started off doing is we gave them each an environment. We said, look, this is your part of the tool. and we split them into different organizations. This is your part. We signed them up. We got the users on board. We had stakeholder workshops with them. And we actually had quite good uptake. So a lot of them came in, they signed up, they told us about 1 or 2 of their data sets, which is great. But at that point we thought, well, some of these organizations are huge organizations. There's like a Welsh national organization, which had, lots and lots and lots of data. Initially, they only told us about a bit of it. And we thought, how can we encourage them to give us more information? How can we have a really complete catalog? How can we make sure they're not just paying us lip service to tick a box and then going away? And so we thought, what carrots and what sticks do we have to give them? Now, some of them had been given a small bit of funding right at the beginning of the program to take part in this, but it didn't really cover all of this, and only got to that first stage. So we didn't really have any more money to give them for this. We couldn't pay them per data set, for instance, that had been added. And we weren't anyone's boss. So we didn't have any sticks. We didn't have a legal framework. We didn't have any governance. We didn't have any way of making them tell us about the data sets they had. But what we did know is that everyone is competitive and no one likes to lose. So we published a league table. And what you can see here is we've got all of the organizations who are involved in the project. You can see the line is the number of data sets and the color is the quality of their submissions. And we use this as a gauge of metadata maturity. And we said this is a KPI that's looking at data maturity for an organization. This is the league table. And immediately we had, the moment we started sending this out to the CIOs, the chief data officers, the heads of medical research, we got massive uptick in activity. So a really good example is there's a big National Data Institute in the UK. In the beginning, they only told us about 3-4 data sets. And the moment this went out to their CDO and he got wind that they were behind one of the other national data institutes and some of the big universities, within 2 weeks they leapfrogged up to the top of the table, and they were in the top 5 ever since then. So it was a really good way of motivating people. Lo and behold, however important you are, no one wants to be bottom of the league. And so it was a fantastic tool that allowed us to get people to onboard more information. And once they got in there and started to onboard that information, we could start to look at measuring value. And I think that's the key point. You've got to go through all of these stages before you can start looking at impact and looking at value. And this is something we're really trying to push at the moment. And if we go back to the schema specification, the way that we're trying to do that is we're a member of DataCite, and we mint a digital object identifier for every data set. So in the past, if you published a paper, and it's the same now, if you publish a paper and lots of people cite your paper and use your research within their research, that's measured, that's tracked. Unfortunately, the data set that was used for that research historically wasn't. And I think there's a big change in the data world where we're trying to mint digital object identifiers so that we can track usage, we can track citations, because a single data set can spawn hundreds, if not thousands, of papers, and you should be tracking the impact of that. And same with government data sets. So we're piloting a scheme at the moment with the ONS, where we're linking into the Altmetric service. And we've generated all the DOIs for all the data sets. And now we're looking at, how many news outlets have used that government paper, how many times has it been blogged, how many times has it been cited by research papers. And it's a really fantastic way of measuring impact. We can also track things like views of the data set itself. We can track access requests. We can look at views of the catalog. And we can look at the overall data maturity of a particular organization or a part of the organization. And it's a fantastic way of tracking value, because if you've got infrastructure and it's being used to publish hundreds, if not thousands of papers, you can go out and ask for more investment. But if you don't have the stats behind that, if you can't track, we have a data set, it spawned a paper, it spawned a drug, and then it saved lots of lives, and there's just a gap in the middle, it's very, very difficult to measure value. And I think once we'd started to do this, you get engagement. So you get people through the first kind of hard bit, get them on the path, motivate them, get the league table out there, bring them in through a bit of gamification, and then start showing them the value of what you're doing. On top of that, I think what we always try to encourage in organizations is that it's not just about creating a data catalog, and it's not just about the researchers. I think there's a big, push there to say, okay, you need to make this data discoverable so that you can ultimately, service your data community. But there's apologies. But there's also a huge amount of value can be gained by, within an organization by deploying a data catalog across your data value chain. So what do I mean by that? Where does your data catalog sit, and where does your data catalog add value? So this is a project we're doing with NHS England, and I think it's a really good diagram that illustrates, all of the different areas, not just the findability, accessibility, but also for a data management team that this can help them. So I think data providers, when they're onboarding data into a data warehouse, can use a catalog to understand data submission requirements. So it's a really nice place. You can put all your specifications and publish them in a central place, have a single source of truth. And if a specification changes for data onboarding, you can change that as well. And I think for data managers, when they're looking at onboarding data for lots of different external providers, it's a fantastic place to ensure that all the information that's needed to process that data is available up front, and it stops this kind of constant backwards and forwards between your data providers and your data managers. So this particular diagram is looking at local authorities, GP practices, CCGs, acute trusts, who all need to provide an integrated care service with a big data warehouse with some data. And by having the catalog there, it allows those providers to find out, what they need to give people, without having this constant back and forward. I've been on a lot of projects where you've had a specification, it hasn't been version managed, it's been in a spreadsheet that gets sent around a lot of different people, and that ultimately leads to a lot of problems downstream where someone's got version 1 and you're on version 3 and suddenly the API fails. So having a central source of truth for your standards is really, really important. So on top of that discovery, you can add value there. In terms of data processing, the catalog can be used by data managers to, understand what data is being acquired, what needs to be processed, identify risks early. And it also allows them to look at best practice. So it's a collaboration environment ultimately, so that these are the mapping tables I've used to map a particular column in the future. In the past, this is how I, brought a data set that looked a little bit different in. And this is the person who built that API or built that script. So it provides visibility within an organization, and I think adds a lot of value to that process. In terms of kind of data enrichment, I think when you build a data warehouse, it's all very well to go out and get all of these data sources and pull them all into a single environment, but provenance is incredibly important. And when you've got multiple providers and something goes wrong, if you don't know the provenance of the data, that can lead to a whole host of different issues. I've been on large scale government programs where we've lost, let's say, cases, and it's taken, because the provenance of the data wasn't adequately captured, it's taken 6 months, consultants 6 months to find out where the issues are, where the problems were, what was the source of that data. So this gives you that map across the organization. In terms of kind of data analysis, I think this is the research context. So immediately it makes the data more findable. The context allows people to know the various different quirks in the data, so they're documented. And ultimately, a knowledge base allows data analysts to understand best practice and how potentially they could integrate the data further. You know, and ultimately you want to go through, if you've gone through the whole of this process, cataloged your data throughout every single step of, you know, the data value chain, it will allow your consumers to discover, understand that data more effectively. The knowledge base means that instead of having a single point of failure within your organization, you can share knowledge. The access request process allows people to have a clear way of governing the access request of data. So a lot of the time there's lots of different rules around data access request. And again, if you've got a catalog, that becomes your shop window. And it provides a mechanism really to manage those data access requests as well for your external data consumers. So, you know, I think a data catalog is really, really important. It allows you to measure impact. It allows you to add value across your organization and ultimately to your external data consumers, but also for your internal data management team, because often they're the bottleneck. You know, I think HDR UK, we talk about it quite a bit, but it was a really, really successful project for us. There was a previous incarnation of Health Data Research UK, and you know, they were you know, maybe an academic organization running it, but they spent many hundreds of thousands of pounds building a data catalog, trying to make health data more discoverable, and they managed about 15 data sets in 3 years. When we came into HDR UK, we managed 450 in 3 months. And off the back of that, you know, we've seen that there've been thousands of papers published. There were 90 plus live projects at the last time I looked. And we're part of the national COVID response. And, you know, some of the organizations who might have been reluctant at the beginning to engage with us very, very quickly saw that they had all of these additional data access requests which were coming in through the service. You know, more people were asking for their data, more people were exploring their data. So it became a really effective, you know, shop window or front door for their service. And we got fantastic engagement. And ultimately, we've delivered something nationally that, you know, hasn't been done before. And it's a real asset for the research community, because now they do have a central place rather than have to go out to hundreds of different people. They've got a central place they can go and find, access, interrogate, and measure the impact of their data. So it's a really fantastic project. I think that's me done. So yeah, if you want to find out any more about some of our case studies, about some of our projects, yeah, feel free to kind of reach out. I think I've got my email there. You can go to the website, you can give me a call, or tag me in LinkedIn. And yeah, really look forward to hearing comments and finding out if you've got any questions.
Thanks, Adam. That was fantastic. Yeah, actually, we already have a bunch of questions lined up, so let's just dive right in. So first of all, Paige, she asked, what software do you use to build the catalog in?
So it's our own software, and so yeah, we built it using Metadata Works. It's based on ISO 11179, and be more than happy. It's a interoperable standard. I'm more than happy to give you a demo if you want to reach out.
There you go. Easy peasy on that one. A question from Alejandra. They ask, how big was the team that worked on this, and what were their profiles? For example, were they all data engineers, or did they have a biology background?
So yeah, different. So we had essentially 3 people working on it, not full time, but it was maybe 4 part time, I would say. So we had someone with a biology background who was an analyst. We had someone with a project management background, IT project management background. We had a data scientist who was good at reporting and could help some of the users profile their data sets. So it gave them some kind of technical background. And then where we had some technical engineers, obviously, to do the configuration. So I think it was a mixed set of skills. But what we wanted, one of the key things about the tool is we wanted to make it as easy as possible to use. I think there are lots of very technical tools out there when it comes to profiling, cataloging data. And when we came into this, I think it goes back to the first slide. You need to really, you want the grad in the team to be able to go in and start the process. You don't want your most expensive data engineer who's got a million other things to do to be the only person who's going to be able to catalog your data. So ultimately, it was really a coordination exercise. We gave them training, managed the stakeholders, and then got someone in their team to start using the tool and gradually improve it.
Yeah, I love that approach. You know, sometimes you see products where it seems like a good idea, the intention is good, but it's essentially, it's a room full of nerds, right? The people that the kind of highest caliber of technical knowledge. So having people from different backgrounds kind of ticks every box and ensures that it's accessible. So I love that. We have a question from Mirko. They ask, how do you measure the impact that good data maturity has on an organization?
So this is almost one one step removed from impact of the data itself. I think the first stage is you have to measure the impact of the data itself. I think without measuring impact, it's very difficult to know what's going on. I think the question is how. So you're saying if you improve maturity, how do you know that that's helped?
So they add a little bit extra in there. They were like, i.e., what are the metrics and key results that you look at in order to prove that a better data maturity makes for a better organization?
And ultimately, it's usage, and it can be different in different organizations. I think when it's research organizations, ultimately, it's going to be research papers. So we're really looking at, how much research has been published off the back of a data set. And I think you can see that making a data set more discoverable, more findable, more interoperable, you will see that more people are viewing the data set, more people are requesting access to the data set. And ultimately, when you generate digital object identifiers, you can start to track citations. And in government departments, it's more like white papers. You can see how many of those white papers have been mentioned in news outlets. So there's a bit of a chain, but as long as you've got the DOI and you can track your way through that, I think those would be the KPIs. Altmetric have some really good ultimate KPIs. I think on healthcare projects, it can be slightly different. In genomics, let's say you're looking at rare diseases, how many people have had diagnoses is a really good one. You're looking at children with rare diseases after you've completed the project. In year 1, where did you get to? In year 2, where did you get to? So it's slightly different for different organizations, but
good answer. So another question from Amelia. They ask, have you guys taken a look at OMOP common data models? It's another standard for healthcare data.
So yes, definitely. So we've done a couple of projects with OMOP, one with Genomics England, funny enough. We've got some more stuff going with Health Data Research UK. A lot of the people were on OMOP. And with NHS England, we've got a big kind of federated metadata project that we've just started. And we're definitely looking at OMOP, especially within secure data environments and trusted research environments. I think it's a fantastic model. I think the idea of supporting federated queries through a shared common data model is really, really good. And we integrate with that. I think I would say you often need another layer because not everyone is going to be on OMOP. And I've also been on, projects where a lot of the transformation from source data sets into OMOP, happens in a load of Python code somewhere. And that Python code has gone into the ether. The source data has kind of gone into the ether. And then you come back to the project 2.5 years later and you go, well, what did I do? Where did I do it? And that's where I think we can add a bit of value on the side of OMOP. You still have OMOP as the common data model. You can start doing federated queries. You've got the analytics environment there. But you've got this metadata layer that looks at the data sources, that looks at the other models within the organization that aren't necessarily OMOP, looks at those mappings. So you've got that, create that organizational memory. So all of that effort and resource you put into that initial bit, and it doesn't get lost in 2-3 years.
I love that idea. Like if systems get deprecated, it's still kind of accessible. Alejandra had another question coming through. How did you deal with nomenclature? I'm going to butcher this word, I know. Nomenclatures / ontologies to have a controlled vocabulary in your catalog. Which tools did you use for that?
So we use our own tools. So we kind of eat our own dog food, where you configure the metadata specification based on the terminologies you've imported into the tool. And then we can, from that schema that you create within the tool, then we generate a schema for the data sets. And then we go from there. I think So it depends. So those standards can come from lots of different places, and you just have to sit with the client. So I think I talked through that start of the process where you create the schema, you'll create an assurance group and a reference group. That your reference group is where you put the specifications out. You start to choose those terminologies. I think in healthcare we're in a fairly privileged position because we've done so much work in it. We've got a lot of those terminologies preloaded into the tools. So things like SNOMED, the NHS Data Dictionary, ICD codes, all of that fun stuff. And we've also got all the ONS geographic standards because we've worked with the ONS. So we tend to try and pick the ones that we know are already in use. But yeah, that's that kind of approach.
Interesting. Definitely some good answers coming out. I think that was all the questions that were loaded in at the time. Folks, if you have got any other questions, I'm sure Adam would be more than happy to answer them if they reach out. You did point out a few ways they can reach you, right?
Definitely, yeah. Feel free to, you've got hopefully my email, adam@metadataworks.co.uk, which should be fairly easy to remember, or ping me on LinkedIn as well. Adam Milward. I should get back to you fairly quickly.
Fantastic.
Well,
honestly, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really informative. Loved the discussion. But we're gonna have to roll on with the show. Thank you though, and I look forward to hearing about your future successes.
Likewise. Thanks, Darren, and thanks all for listening. And hopefully speak soon.
Cheers, Adam. Okay, guys, that's another talk wrapped up. Really informative one. Love the way you guys engage with that. Keep those questions coming. I'd just love to pump them to them. Adam, I love the enthusiasm he brought. But alas, we have to keep the show running. So what we're going to do now, short break. And when we return, our next speaker will take to the stage. Stay tuned.